For 30 years, it sat in a bag of animal bones, a single fragment, smaller than a coin, boxed up with the remains of the birds and deer that ancient people had eaten in a cave in eastern Spain. Nobody looked twice at it. It was just one more scrap from an old dig, cataloged, shelved, and forgotten. And then, decades later, someone sorting back through that box picked it up and realized it wasn't an animal at all. It was part of a child's skull, the bone from behind the ear, the piece that holds the inner ear inside it, the organ that lets you hear, and the one that lets you stand up without falling. And when they put that tiny fragment into a scanner and looked at what was preserved inside it, they found something that shouldn't have been possible. They found a child who couldn't have survived, and who did anyway for years. To understand why that's strange, you have to know who this child was and when. She was a Neanderthal. She lived somewhere between 150 and 270,000 years ago, long, long before our own kind ever reached that part of the world. Her people were nomads. They moved constantly, following the animals, because standing still meant starving. Survival meant everyone pulling their weight every single day in a world with no medicine, no safety, and no margin at all for anyone who couldn't keep up. And here is what the scan of that inner ear revealed. The delicate structures inside it were malformed, not slightly, profoundly. The parts that carry sound were shrunken and deformed, which means this child was almost certainly deaf. And the parts that hold your balance, the three tiny loops that tell you which way is up, were malformed too. Which means she didn't just live in silence, she lived in a world that would not hold still. Try to imagine it. You can't hear anything? Not a voice, not a warning, not a predator moving through the grass behind you. And at the same time, the ground tilts and swims under you without warning. Standing is hard. Walking is harder. A sudden turn of the head can drop you. You are a small child in the Ice Age who cannot hear danger coming and cannot reliably stay on her feet. The specific pattern of malformations they found has a name in living people today. That same cluster, all appearing together, is associated with Down syndrome. The scientists were careful. They couldn't recover any DNA, so they can't be certain of the diagnosis. But they could be certain of the effects written into the bone. At the very least, deep deafness and a body that could barely keep its balance. A child like that in that world should not have lived very long at all. And we actually know how long children like her tend to survive without help. Scientists have since found other ancient people, confirmed through their DNA, to have had Down syndrome. Every single one of them died in infancy. None lived past about 16 months. There's even a case of a young chimpanzee born with a similar condition. It survived 23 months. And only because its mother and an older sister carried it constantly. The moment that help stopped, the child would have too. That's the pattern. These children die as babies unless someone spends themselves keeping them alive. This child lived to at least 6 years old. Not 16 months, 6 years. Long enough to lose her baby teeth, 4 times longer than any similar child we know of, in the hardest conditions humans have ever lived through. And that number, 6, is the whole mystery. Because there is only one way a deaf child who couldn't keep her balance reaches the age of 6 in a nomadic Ice Age band. Somebody carried her for years. Every time the group moved to a new hunting ground, and they moved constantly, someone had to carry a child who couldn't walk the distance. Someone had to make sure she ate because a child who can't hear and can't balance can't easily forage or keep up at a kill. Someone had to watch her every waking hour because she couldn't hear the dangers the others heard. This wasn't a night of kindness. It wasn't a hard week that passed. This was years, thousands of days of someone choosing, again, to carry a child who could not carry herself. And here's the part that reaches the bottom of it. You might be thinking, that's just a mother. A mother would do that. Of course her mother cared for her. But think about what that actually took. Her mother could not have done it alone, in a group that survives only because every adult is gathering, hunting, working. A mother cannot carry a disabled child and feed her and guard her every hour of every day and also do everything she herself needs to do to stay alive. It isn't physically possible, not over years. For this child to reach 6, other people had to help. The group had to absorb the cost. Other hands had to take the child so the mother could work. Other people had to share food the child would never help gather. Other eyes had to watch her. They cared for someone who could give them nothing back. That's what makes this different from everything we knew before. We already had evidence that Neanderthals looked after their injured, but those were adults. A hunter who broke his leg and healed. Someone who might, one day, return the favor. Care you can explain as an investment. A debt that might be repaid. A deaf, dizzy child could never repay anything. She couldn't hunt, couldn't gather, couldn't stand guard. Couldn't, in the brutal arithmetic of survival, ever be worth what she cost. And they carried her anyway, for years, in a world that gave them every reason not to. So we want to call it love. We want to say this is the oldest evidence of compassion. Proof that 150,000 years ago, someone looked at a helpless child and simply loved her enough to carry her. And this is where we have to be honest. Because the honesty is the whole point. We cannot prove that. Bone doesn't preserve feeling. We can prove that she was carried. We can prove it cost them and that it returned nothing and that they did it anyway for years. What we cannot do is reach across that gap and know what it felt like from the inside, whether it was love or duty or habit or something they never had a word for. But look at how small that gap actually is. On one side, the thing we can prove, a child who could give nothing, kept alive by people who gained nothing for 6 years through the Ice Age. On the other side, the thing we long to know, that it was love. That's a very short distance, and it happens to be the exact distance you are trying not to think about in your own life. Because underneath this whole story is a question you already carry, and it has nothing to do with Neanderthals. It's the fear of being a burden, the quiet suspicion that you're valued for what you provide, that the love around you is somewhere in the fine print, conditional on your being useful. That if you stopped being able to give, if you got sick or old or broke in some way that couldn't be fixed and became someone who only takes, the people around you might gently set you down. This child is the oldest answer we have to that fear. Not a comfortable answer, not a promise, just this. 150,000 years ago, in the hardest world humans have ever faced, there was a child who could give nothing back, and someone picked her up and kept picking her up day after day for years, long past the point where it made any sense. The scientists gave her a name. They called her Tina, because they couldn't tell from that fragment of bone whether she was a girl or a boy. But they'd come to think of her as a girl. And they named her after the man who spent nearly his whole life digging in the cave where she was found. A small, tender act across 150,000 years. From people who never knew her to a child who never got to be known. Which is, when you think about it, the same thing her own people did. They held someone who could not hold them back. Maybe that's the oldest human thing there is. Older than farming. Older than language. Older, even, than our own species. She couldn't carry herself. Someone did. And some quiet part of you is still asking whether, if it came to it, someone would do the same for you.